Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to show you a chess study. This is a chess study from 1851. This was composed by B. Horwitz and J. Kling. Chess study is an interesting way to learn chess. There are lots of beautiful ideas, lots of strategies and plans that are not quite obvious while looking at a position. For example, positions that seem like a draw turns out to be a win for one side, and positions that seem like a win for one side turns out to be a win for the other side, and so on. This chess study is one such example where we learn a method called the Queen's Ladder Maneuver. This is something that I found to be very interesting, and I'm sure you will find it equally interesting. Let's look at the position we have on the screen right now. It's white to play and win. In case you would like to pause this video and try to come out with a solution, please go ahead and I will pause for a moment. Alright, I think you would have looked at the position for a while now and you would have come up with some ideas. As I said, this is a beautiful composition from the year 1851 by composers B. Horwitz and J. Kling from Kasparyan's compositions book. Let's start with the options that white has in this position. Obviously, from black's perspective, the best that he can achieve in this position is a draw. And therefore, black's idea would be to trade off the queens from the board and hope for a draw, because after the queens are traded, white would just be left with a knight with which he cannot obviously mate, and it would be a draw. And on the other hand, what white wants to do is to use the power of the extra piece that he has, the knight that he has, to overwhelm black's position somehow and try and win the queen and win the game. This can be achieved by probably forking the king and queen, and we'll see the technique going forward. Before trying to solve this position, we need to understand at first that black's king is cornered. He doesn't have too many squares, doesn't have too many options, and white's queen and king have a lot of hope. They have a lot of mobility, and it's white to move, so white needs to keep the initiative, and white cannot afford to lose the initiative to black, because the moment black gets the initiative and starts checking white, there will be no way of getting out of checks, because it's a wide open board, and once black's queen gets active, there is no way to get out of checks, so it might end in a draw. So white needs to keep initiative, and the best way to keep initiative right now would be to give checks. So all that white hopes to do is maneuver his queen in such a way that he gets closer to the opponent's king and make it uncomfortable for black. White has a few options to begin with. The first one that comes to mind perhaps is queen a8 check, but we need to notice that queen a8 check immediately results in a draw, because black is forced to make queen a7 move, which is a counter check, and white will be forced to trade queens, and obviously this is a draw. So queen a8 check doesn't seem to be doing great things for white. We have to look at the other options. The next option that comes to mind is queen c8 check. Queen c8 check is a bit more attractive compared to the last option, because now black cannot afford to block the check with his queen, because that will simply lose the queen. And if king were to go to a5, then there is a knight fork, and therefore that option is also ruled out, and king a7 is the only move. But after king a7, does white really have a great way to continue his initiative? It doesn't seem like he has a great initiative after the last move, because maybe queen can try queen c4 and threatening knight c8, but this simply loses the initiative. and therefore we can easily conclude that queen c8 check also does not work. The other option that is available is queen a1 check. A queen a1 check looks much more interesting to me because black's move is forced. Black's only option is to block the check with his queen at queen a5, and white has further options to continue his initiative, continue with more checks, and probably push black into a more uncomfortable position. And perhaps this is a line that we want to analyze in depth. So I guess at this point we can conclude that compared to the position we started, where we had three options, queen a1 check, queen a8 check, and queen c8 check, we found that queen a1 check seems to be the most forcing one because it pushes black to block the check and white has further options to continue his initiative. Queen f1 check is the next move. So when we play the move queen f1 check, we notice that black doesn't have too many options right now. Blocking the check is out of question because the knight is guarding the square where the queen can block, and the king has only two squares to move, king a7 and king b6. King b6 loses immediately to the knight 4 at c4, and therefore that is not possible, and the only option the black is left with is king to a7. And now we start what I was talking about previously, the ladder maneuver. Using this maneuver, the queen gets closer and closer to the opponent's king and make life more uncomfortable for black. So the next move is queen f2 check, and it's important to understand that the only option that black has at this point would be to move his king back to a6. Let's see what happens if black tries to make some other move, such as king a8. In case of king a8, white has an immediate win with queen f3 check, which will force the king to either a7 or to b8 and will result in a mate on b7. And in case, instead of king a8, black tries the move king b8 in this position, this will also lose immediately. Do you see the move? The move is queen b2 check. Queen b2 check, and the king is forced to a8, and queen b7 will be checkmate. So king a8 and king b8 are not really the options to consider for black. Also note that always black cannot try the move queen b6 because that will be met with knight c8 check, which will be very embarrassing, forking the king and queen. So the only option that black is left with is to move to a6. And king a6 will be met with queen to e2 check. Notice how we started from the square f1 and slowly we moved to f2 and then to e2. And seems like the ladder maneuver is starting to happen after all. Also note that all those moves that we saw in the last position still apply, and the king has only one option to go to, which is a7. And now queen e3 check, and the king does not have the squares a8 or b8 because that will lead to immediate loss. So the king is forced to go back to a6, and now queen d3 check. It's getting difficult for black as white is inching closer. Queen starts from f1, moves to f2, and then to e2, and then to e3, and then to d3. And all that black could do perhaps is just to wait. And after all, the king is now forced to a7, and white proceeds with the maneuver and comes even closer with d4 check and a6, queen c4 check, king goes to a7. So this is the point we reach, and at this point the white queen cannot come any closer because the black queen is guarding the squares around the black king, but we do have a knight b5 check, and this is a place where we need precise calculation. Now king to a6 is the only option that is available for black, because any other move will immediately lose. For example, if king goes to a8, then queen c8 is checkmate. And if king tries to go to b6, then queen c6 is checkmate. And if king tries to go to b8, then queen c8 is checkmate. So all these options of king a8, king b6, and king b8 are ruled out because of mate in 1. So in case if king tries to go to b7, then white has a mate in 2, starting with queen c6 check, forcing the black king to b8, and queen c8 leads to checkmate. So the only move that does not lose immediately is king a6 again, and at this point the composers have given a beautiful finish with queen to c6 check. In fact, in this position there is another way of winning with knight d4 check. This wins by force too, but this is not the line that was given by the composers. However, you can try the other ways of winning for your practice. I'm just showing the main line over here, which is knight d4 check, which will result in king to b7, followed by queen c8 check, king a7, and then knight c6 check, forking the king and queen. But this is not the line that has been given by the composers for this position, but they have given queen c6 check, which also wins quite elegantly. Now, in fact, this is much more easier to calculate because the moves that black can make are forced. Queen b6 is the only move here, and at this point white has a winning move. If you want, you can pause the video at this position and find the winning move for white. Well, I hope you came out with the move knight c7 check. After knight c7 check, the position is just beyond control for black. Black cannot save the position. If black tries king a5, then white has the beautiful check at a8 with a queen, and this will force the king to go to the square b4, which will allow knight to d5 check, winning the queen. And after knight c7 check, if king goes to a7, then queen to a8 is a mate on the spot. It's interesting to note how white is calling all the shots here and black just cannot do anything after queen c6 check. At this position, queen b6, knight c7 check, forcing the king to the uncomfortable square a5, and after queen a8 check, king is forced to move to b4, and there is a only square. There is no option to block as well. The queen just cannot block because all the squares are guarded by the queen and knight, and any sort of blocking will also be suicidal and will be an immediate win for white. So the only move that black can make is king to b4, and this is won by force. Now let's do a small recap of the study that we just saw before we move on to the next one. We started with this position, and white started with queen to a1 check, and from here we saw that the white queen slowly and steadily came closer to the black king, and all that black could do is simply wait and watch. Of course, in this position black's only move is to play queen a5, and that will lead to queen f1 check, king is forced to a7, and then queen f2 check, king is forced back to a6, and as we saw, any other move will lose immediately. For example, king a8 loses to queen f3 check, followed by mate on b7, and king b8 will lose to queen b2 check, followed by mate on b7. So the only option that black had was to play king a6, and this then leads to queen e2 check, king a7. The ladder maneuver starts to happen. Queen e3 check, king a6, queen d3 check, king a7, queen d4 check, king a6, queen c4 check, and king a7. This will be followed by knight b5, bringing the other piece into the game, and all of a sudden black's position has become very, very difficult. And uh, and again, at this position, black is forced to play the move king a6, because in case he tries to make the move b7, that will simply lose to queen c6 check, followed by king to b8 and queen c8 mate. And in case of king a8, after knight b5 check, queen c8 is checkmate. And in case you're wondering what happens after king b6, which seems interesting, queen c6 is also checkmate. And obviously, in case of king b8, queen c8 is checkmate. So after knight b5 check, king a6 is literally forced. And this leads to a beautiful finish with queen to c6. The queen c6 check, queen is forced to block with b5 and knight c7 check. The king is forced to move to a5 because king a7 leads to an immediate checkmate at a8. And the only move is to play king a5, and this also loses to queen a8 check, because this forces the king to b4, allowing knight b5 check, winning the queen and winning the game for white. Now, just to make it interesting, let me show you another chess study in case you were wondering if this idea can be implemented anywhere else. Here, everything is equal. Of course, there is an extra pawn for black, which does not make a lot of difference to his position. This is another chess study from the book by Kasparyan. This study is by an anonymous composer, but it's equally beautiful as the last one, and it carries out with the same idea. This is the position where it is white to play and win, and I'll give you a moment to pause the video and try and solve the position right now. Well, I hope you came out with a winning idea. If we examine this position, it's easy to note that black king is placed a bit awkwardly and the black's queen is not very active, whereas white's king and white's queen are pretty much in best squares. And I would like to quote Kasparyan here. He says, "The queen plus a minor piece possess big possibilities for attack against the queen when the king of the weaker side is in an unhappy situation. This ending without pawns is viewed as a draw, but some cases the stronger side is capable of taking the initiative, operating with threats of mate and capture of the queen. Such endings require a thorough and precise analysis for a correct assessment of the position." And this position is one such position where a precise calculation can ensure that white wins, and in other cases he might just be able to draw. And always note that pawn grabbing is not recommended in these sort of positions because it might lose the initiative. What happens after queen takes pawn on g5 check? It loses the initiative. We note that king can go to f7, and now it's an awkward position for white. The white's queen is assigned to the defense of the knight, and the knight is under attack. If the queen has to move, then the knight has to move first, and the knight has to go to f5. And if knight goes to f5, queen c3 check comes in, and obviously the advantage of white has just been lost. Note that after queen takes pawn on g5, there is no further way to keep the initiative. Any check with the queen will simply lose the knight, and it's an unfortunate situation for white because he just lost the initiative trying to grab the pawn, and his extra minor piece will make no difference. Knight f5 is the only move, and after that queen c3 will give the activity to black. And all of a sudden black's queen is not really trapped in the corner, and the position is simply a draw. That's why white needs to be very careful in these sort of position, because grabbing the pawn, which seems attractive in the beginning because it comes with a check, it simply loses the initiative and loses an opportunity to win the game because there is no follow-up and there is no way to keep the initiative, and the winning move is queen e5 check. Notice how queen e5 check skewers the black king to the black queen, but of course the king will stay in touch with the queen, defending the queen by staying in h7. And now white goes queen to e4 check. And this becomes slowly apparent that black king does not have too many options after all, and because the move king h6 straight away loses to queen g6 knight. So the king obviously cannot go to the squares that are covered by the knight. So the only move that the black king can make is to go back king g7. And now white plays the move queen d4 check. And why is white playing this move? The aim here is to move the queen to a more attractive square. The queen wants to go to the long diagonal, the h1a8 diagonal, because if that happens, the winning idea here is to win the black queen, but the black king will always stay in defense of the black king. We are just trying to take control of more important squares by using our queen, and the queen is going to maneuver its way slowly to the h1a8 diagonal, and that is what is happening right now with queen d4 check. The queen is starting with its ladder maneuver right now. And just imagine the amount of control the white queen will have on the board once it reaches this h1a8 diagonal compared to the completely passive black queen. We started this position with queen e5 check, king h7, queen e4 check, king g7, queen d4 check, king h7, queen d3 check, and we see the ladder maneuver happening once again in this position. But wait, why is the white queen moving away from the black king over here? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't the white queen try to move towards the black king? No. In this position, the white queen apparently is moving away, but the aim is to get to a better diagonal from where the queen can control key squares. After king g7, queen c3 check, king h7, queen c2 check, king g7, queen b2 check, king h7, queen b1 check, king g7. We do not want to lose the initiative and we have to operate with checks here. It is absolutely essential not to give a break to the black player here. Queen a1 check, king h7, queen h1 check. And it is obvious now that the king has to go to the g7 square, stay in touch with the black queen, which is the only option pretty much in this position for black. Now the question is there a way to force the black king from defense of the queen? And we try with knight f5 check. The king goes to g8 and now there is a winning move for white. I would like you to pause the video to try and see if you can come out with a winning move for white in this position. And I hope you came up with this move queen d5 check, because after queen d5 check we realize that the king does not have the square g7 anymore because the knight has been covering it and the king has to move somewhere, and if king goes to h7 it is an immediate loss because of queen f7 check. And if you didn't realize, all the squares around the king has been covered by the knight and the queen combination, and the only option that black is left with is to block the check with queen g7, and that will be met with the mate on g7. Therefore, king h7 is not the best move after all, and the only other option is king f8, and now the move queen a8 check. This is what we have been waiting for. Now we realize that the whole maneuver so far was done to ensure that we are able to collect the black queen. The king cannot guard the black queen any longer, and this is an easy win for white. Let's do a recap of the study. The initial position is very clear. White is a piece up. White has a lot of activity. White's queen is much more active than the black queen, but there should be a very concrete and precise way to take advantage of the situation, and the right move for white in this point is to play queen to e5 check. And after queen e5 check, the king goes to h7. That's pretty much the only square for the king here. That will be followed with queen e4 check, and the king has to go to g7, queen d4 check, king h7, queen d3 check. The king has to go back to g7, queen c3 check, king h7, queen c2 check, queen b2 check, b1 check, queen a1 check, and queen h1 check, followed by knight f5 check. And after the king goes to g8, the winning move here is queen d5 check, a very strong move in this position. If not for this move, all the ladder maneuver that we have done for so long would not have given us any benefit. And black's reply is forced. He has to go to f8 with his king. And if king goes to h7, we have queen f7 check, and the only option is to block, and that will result in a mate, so that is not the viable move here. The king has to go to f8, and queen a8 check will seal the game for white. Well, that was a great study, wasn't it? And I hope you enjoyed this video. Do subscribe for more chess videos. Bye bye for now.